Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule today to join us for the PIPS Economic Increase and Retro Pay webinar. My name is Shelley Melanson, and I'm the team lead for the PIPS Mobilization Department. Over the last year, the mobilization team has been actively engaged in the PIPS bargaining campaign Do Better. And one of the primary goals of the campaign was to secure the best deal possible for our members, which included an economic increase that reflects the true cost of living. Thanks to your incredible support and the incredible hard work of our members and activists, we were able to secure significant gains and establish the provisions we're going to be discussing today. I'm joined today by Ryan Campbell, the PIPS's economist who supported the central table negotiations. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
So before we get started, I'd just like to go over some of the technical details for the webinar platform to ensure that everyone can actively participate in today's session. I wanted to let you know that today's training will be recorded and will be available on our website later this week. We're also going to be uploading a copy of the slide deck that we're going through today, so you'll be able to download it and use it as a point of reference. As you've likely already realized, we have taken the liberty of muting the audio sound system, or muting the system right now for the audio. We've done this to reduce some of the background noise and ensure the quality of audio for your fellow participants. But when we begin the question and answer portion of the presentation, we will unmute the line and give you the opportunity to ask questions over the phone. In the meantime, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you can open the chat tab in Zoom. The chat tab can be accessed at the bottom center of your screen. And if you can't see it right now, if you hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen, it'll appear. It looks sort of like a little speech bubble. For those logging in on your mobile device, the same process applies, except that you'll be selecting the chat icon located in the bottom right corner of your screen. You enter your question, press return, we'll be able to see it and send a message back to you. I and my colleague Andrea will be monitoring the chat box throughout the session, so if you have any issues, please don't hesitate to send us a message. While we're on the line, I just want to check, and maybe folks can reply in the chat box. Can everyone hear the audio all right now? And if you want to just write in the chat box, yes, the audio is fine, that would be super helpful. Brilliant. Thanks so much, folks, for letting us know that. What you should be seeing if you are tuned into Zoom and not just calling into the audio line right now, in the center of your screen is the title slide for our slide deck. As we move through the presentation, you're going to see the slides change. If at any point you don't see the slides change or you lose visual connection, please let us know in the chat box. Does anyone have any questions about the webinar platform before we begin? And if you have a question, you can type it into the chat box now. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So we'll get started. The objective of today's session really is to provide our stewards and our members with a clear understanding of the timelines for the implementation of your new collective agreement and your retro payment. And it's also an opportunity to ask questions about the economic increase and some of the changes that you'll see. I'd now like to take the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker, Ryan Campbell. Ryan has over a decade of experience in negotiations at the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada. He is the Institute's economist and played a leading role at our central table negotiations. Please join me in welcoming Ryan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Shelley. So I'm just going to jump right in to the presentation. So the origin of this presentation is really from a recognition that there's a lot of confusion and distrust related to pay, and we wanted to give people a little bit more certainty as these contracts, as the new contract is being implemented. It's a technical subject. For some, it may seem daunting, and so ideally provide you with some tricks and tools to help you feel more comfortable, and then ideally that you'll feel more comfortable helping others. At our core, as a union, we are a community of colleagues standing together, helping each other out, and this is particularly relevant for you. I mean, this training session is geared towards stewards, and you are at the front line. Many people will come to you first when they have these types of questions, and hope this will hopefully equip you with a few tools to answer some of them. Start from the beginning. What is implementation? What are we talking about here? The two big conditions are, when you negotiate a new contract, at some point after the signing, the rates of pay will change to reflect the new contracts. And then sometime after that, you receive retro pay based on the time that has elapsed since the expiry of the last contract. The background for the implementation process, there was a well-established process for implementation, as many of you probably remember. There was a lot of trust in the employer to provide you with the correct amounts owed, and of course all that trust has been kind of laid to waste after the Phoenix problems, and it was particularly bad during the last round of negotiation, where we're still sorting through some of those issues, but we didn't want to let those issues prevent us from coming to a new deal. And it was particularly relevant because we wanted to come to a deal before the most recent federal election. And so, the central bargaining team and the individual bargaining teams worked hard to get these deals done. And in order to do that, we had to figure out a way to work around Phoenix. And this, it's a relatively complicated, process in its entirety. It's listed fully in the in a memorandum of understanding at the back of the collective agreement. And these are, dense, and but we're going to give you an overview of the relevant points and some useful tips that you can use in interpreting some of the more complicated parts. So some of the highlights of this new alternative implementation process. The big one is that we agreed to an extended implementation timeline, extended to 180 days from the 90 or 120 days after the signing of the collective agreements, which was what was used before. But we also wanted to make sure that the employer faces penalties in recognition of these extended timelines. So each member with a new collective agreement will be entitled to $400. And then for those for which the implementation is delayed beyond that 180 days, and by implementation, I mean those two criteria, your rate of pay is changed to reflect the new contract and you receive a retro payment. So if that hasn't happened for you within 180 days, you receive an extra $50 on day 181, and then $50 every 90 days up to a maximum of 450 on top of that original 400. So some additional highlights. Hopefully it's a little bit comforting to see that Phoenix will not be doing the calculations. It's a different methodology. It's a different system that will be used. Lump sum payments will be paid out by Phoenix, but Phoenix won't be doing the calculations. A similar process was used in 2018 at the Canada Revenue Agency, and it was quite effective implementing contracts for the 40,000 employees there. As well, implementation will be more gradual and staggered. So that means not everyone will be paid at the same time, and not everyone will receive everything that's owed to them all at once. There will be a methodical approach based on how easy it is for the system to process the different cases. In general, we wanted the employer to, we were less concerned about the delay and more concerned about the penalty. We wanted the employer to get it right, and we wanted the timelines and promises to be meaningful. We were okay if they needed more time, but we wanted to make sure that it came with a penalty. So that was our approach during the negotiation process. The big elephant in the room, the big obstacle, of course, is the ongoing problems related to Phoenix. And so, there are still, hundreds of thousands of unresolved cases. And in order for all the retro, files to be closed, technically all the Phoenix backlog needs to be finished, and there was no way we were going to get the employer to agree that all Phoenix problems would be fixed within 180 days. And so we had to come up with a compromise, a way to figure out what we could hold the employer accountable for within 180 days. And so the approach we've taken is so that for everyone, they will take a snapshot of your historical salary record on a specific day, and then give you retro based on everything that you were paid during the retro period. And so, of course, if there are ongoing Phoenix-related problems, you may still be owed more afterwards, and you will get that, once those Phoenix problems are corrected. But it may not be within 180 days, and it may not be subject to the additional $50 penalties. But just to keep in mind that there's a separate process for recuperating out-of-pocket expenses and damages related to Phoenix, and that's kind of what we had to do. We had to separate implementation issues from ongoing Phoenix issues, and our expectation is that with our approach, mostly everybody will get most of what they're owed within the 180 days. After that, it doesn't change the total amount that's owed. But we can't guarantee that everyone will get everything within 180 days. And just to point out, we have some FAQs up, and most of what I've discussed so far go into more depth on these issues in the FAQs. I want to devote as much time as possible to understanding and to the next sections, which is understanding and verifying your retro payments. So, if you have more questions on these, Shelley's going to share a direct link in the chat box, and you can look at those. But, I am going to open it up for a few questions now. I'd ask, ideally, if you'd focus on the subject matter, on the slides that we just went over. I know this is a very broad topic, and there are lots of questions, but there are still a few more sections to cover, sorry.
We'll be doing a Q&A on the other sections as well. So there's 2 more Q&A. So we'll try and focus questions right now on the implementation. If you'd like to ask a question over the phone, you can use the raise your hand icon. It looks like a little hand waving. It's at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, again, you just hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen and it should appear. When you raise your hand, I'll take a speakers list, and when it's your turn, I'll say your name and unmute your line. When your line is unmuted, you'll first get a pop-up window asking you to confirm that you wish to have your line unmuted. You select Unmute Now button, and you'll be able to ask your question over the phone. If you feel more comfortable writing out your question in the chat box, you can also do that, and I will read it over the phone. So the first question that we have is in the chat box, and it's from Stefan, and it says, what program is being used to calculate the retro pay? Is this SAP?
So the PIPSC is taking control of this process away from the Treasury Board and Phoenix. My understanding is it's the HRMS system that's being used, and then with some customized software that they've used to apply these standardized percentage increases to these historical salary records.
Our next question is from Molly, and she's asking, is the staggered payout based within groups or employers?
It is not employers. It's more based on groups, and then it's more based on your individual situation. So if something like an individual who was on parental leave has already kind of been flagged as a case that will likely come in 2 segments, regardless of what group they're in. But group and individual situation is the answer to that question.
Any other questions just on the implementation process that Ryan had highlighted? I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat box. Again, we're going to have 2 more Q&A periods throughout this session as we go tackle the actual nitty-gritty of calculating your retro pay. But if you do have a question, you can use the raise your hand icon if you'd like to ask a question over the phone, or you can pop it in the chat box. Again, if you want to ask a question over the phone, if you hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen, what will appear is an option to click on the raise your hand icon. I've got 2 more questions from the chat box, pardon me, 3, so I'm going to ask those questions. One question is, I can't find the ratification date for the SH group on the website. Can you tell me when that was?
The ratification, so it's the date of signing is the relevant date that you want. And I believe, I don't have the information in front of me, but I believe it's August 30th. But if you go to the group page on the PIPS website and find the SH group, I generally, to my understanding, all groups announced when the date of signing was. And so, yes.
I would also just recommend, if folks are trying to click on the link in the chat box and it's not linking them directly to the site, you may just want to copy and paste it into your browser URL. That sometimes works a little bit better. And I'm hearing confirmation from Patty that that is correct, August 30th. And I did have a question about whether or not, if have any groups received retro pay to date.
Yeah, numerous groups have received retro pay to date. But again, not everybody within those groups has received retro pay. I know, I mean, the health services group, because of they have, I think there are more cases within the SH group that haven't received retro pay yet. But again, so the employer has 180 days. And so unless you receive notification saying that they expect a delay, I would say that, you know, you should expect your salary, until further notice, you should expect your salary to be changed and a retro payment within 180 days, which puts us at the end of February.
So we have one last question in the chat box for this round, and this comes to us from Ronald. He's asking, do we expect, pardon me, sorry, I've got 2, my apologies. Do we expect people that utilize LWIA to have more issues with retro pay calculation?
Short answer, yes. Anything, so this is kind of an leave with income averaging is a special case that it's been flagged where it may require additional time. But again, so if the employer can't process your case within 180 days, then they're on the hook for additional penalties.
Sounds great. So that looks like that's all the questions that we have in the chat box. So we're going to turn it back over to Ryan for more of the presentation.
So we're going to get in to, as Shelley alluded to, some of the nitty-gritty of actually understanding the specifics of the retro payments. You know, starting from the beginning with you know the principles behind these retro payments. And so the retro payment period starts when the old contract expires and ends when your salary is adjusted to reflect the new rates of pay. So, you know, first day of the new contract goes along, and you're owed this amount is kind of accumulating. And then when your rate of pay gets changed to the new rate of pay, then that amount stops, and there's going to be a lag between that day and when you actually receive a retro payment. But that period will define how much you earn. It is a very personalized calculation. It's based on your personal work history. It includes, you know, your base salary, any overtime, acting assignments, etc., that you carried out. What qualifies for retro is any compensation that's linked to your annual salary. Overtime, applicable acting assignments, maternity, parental allowance, these are all things that are a percentage of your annual salary. And so, you know, when you negotiate new wage increases that go back to the first day of the contract, then, you know, it becomes what you were owed during that time. What pay doesn't qualify for retro is anything that's a fixed amount. And so this stuff like a shift premium of, say, you know, an extra $1 an hour, that $1 an hour stays $1 an hour. It doesn't, there's no retro attached in most cases. Or if you have, let's say, an educational allowance of a fixed amount, like, say, you know, a $3,000 educational allowance, that's still a $3,000 allowance. There's no retro on that. And in most cases, and I'm fairly certain all cases in this round, that if there are any changes negotiated to this, they're on a go forward basis. So they take effect after implementation, not from the first day of the contract. Okay, and so the next, just wanted to give you this rough estimate, and this is an approach that you can use to figure out a good, but again, rough estimation of how much you're owed. And you know, tried to make it simple enough that you could do it with, you know, a piece of paper and a calculator on your phone. The approach just involves breaking it down into two periods. And so for each period, there's an amount of salary earned, and you times that by the appropriate percentage increase for that period. And the same with the second period. It's a different amount of salary and then a different percentage increase. But this is actually customized to the current situation because, and it's two periods because more than a year has passed since the expiry of pretty much all collective agreements. And so, you know, that's, if you break it down into two periods, you should be able to come up with a pretty good estimate. So we're going to look at a specific example, and this highlights just how personalized these calculations are. Everything is specific to you, and so in order to do an example, we have to come up with this fictitious person. And so here we're using a PC2 that was earning the maximum salary as of September 30th, 2018. And so this is from, this is what the maximum salary was before taxes and deductions in the expired collective agreement. And so the PC is in the SP bargaining group. And so the first day of the SP collective agreement was October 1st, 2018. Their salary was adjusted based on the new contract effective October 3rd, 2019. So a little over a year after the expiry of the agreement. This individual worked continuously from October 1st, 2018 until October 2nd, 2019, the whole period. There were no breaks. They didn't receive any compensation over and above their base salary, no OT, no acting, for the sake of keeping this example simple. So period one in this example is a full year. It's the full year within the collective agreement. So it's the first day of the collective agreement to the end of the year. So October 1st to September 30th. Period two is a much smaller period. It's only 2 days. So it's October 1st, 2019, which is the first day of the second year of the collective agreement, to just, you know, one more day, because on the following day their salary was adjusted to the new salary, and therefore no more retro is accumulated. And so the year one total percentage increase for the SP group, as well as for numerous other groups, was 2.816%. And the year two total percentage increase for the SP group was 5.082%. This is a cumulative amount. And again, so this is true for a lot of groups, but these amounts are not true for everybody. And so moving on, this will just give you a window into how we come about to those numbers, where those numbers come from. So you look at this is for the SP group contract, effective October 1st, 2018, the first day of the contract. They negotiate a 2% economic increase and a 0.8% wage adjustment. And so with compounding, that becomes a 2.816% increase. So all salary earned within that first year of the agreement, if you want to know your retro, you just take all your earnings and times it by 2.816%, and that's roughly what you're owed. For year two, so you start, because it's cumulative, you start with everything you received in year one, 2.816, but then in that year they negotiated another 2% economic increase and another 0.2% wage adjustment. So the total amount with compounding becomes 5.082%. And so any salary earned within that second period, you times it by 5.082%, and that's the retro that you're for that period. And you know, just for the sake of being thorough, the percentage increase is determined by each collective agreement. The amounts may be different for different classifications or different levels. So tying it all together, looking at the earnings for period one. So this is the first year of that collective agreement. So we've used the entire annual salary. But for period two, it's a much shorter time period. It's only 2 days. So we did 2 days worth of salary. And then if you look at the bottom here, the equation really, the estimate really comes down to just these, you know, an amount, like an amount of earnings times a percentage plus an amount of earnings times a percentage. And so what you get here is an estimate for this individual as to how much retro they're owed. And this is pretty good. If you spend time and really delve into the details and figure out the exact dates that apply to you, you can actually be pretty accurate. But if you just want a ballpark, a rough estimate, you can just kind of do it with with a calculator off the top of with numbers off the top of your head, and still probably come pretty close. And if you are somebody that wants to really get into the nitty-gritty of the details, these definitions will help you find kind of more precise amounts owed for different time periods. Okay.
So we're going to take some questions about those calculations if people have them. We'll start again by going to the phone. So if you do want to ask a question over the phone, you can use the raise your hand icon. It's located at the bottom of your screen next to the chat icon. I'll keep a speakers list, and when I call your name, or if you've used your telephone number as your username, I'll call that. You'll get a pop-up message asking you to confirm that you wish to unmute your line. You select unmute, and you'll be able to ask your question over the phone. You can also type your question in the chat box as well, if that is of interest to you. And if you need us to go back to a particular slide that Ryan's gone over, we can also do that. So just let us know in the chat box. I do have a note from Eve, who says that the pay stub will list a number of periods, but the sum of days should add up to 260 days for 1 year. So I have a question asking about, so currently the SP group has a 5.018% increase, correct?
So if you're tracking it based on what the salary was in when they received the last increase of the last collective agreement. So it would have been in 2017. And so if you look at the difference between that salary and today, your salary should be 5.0. What is it? 5.082%.
1.8. Basically the number that he said.
Yeah, 5.082.
Kai is asking, so we calculate the percentage ourselves? Question mark.
The percentages will be listed in the collective agreements. Recognize that the collective agreements haven't been posted by the employer yet, even though it's been quite a long time since they've been signed. Normally they're posted kind of at the same time as they're signed. We are going to post like a cheat sheet and say, hey, within the next week, that will just kind of list all the economic increases for everybody. But in the meantime, if you've received retro payments, they should be. You will have access to these numbers, and I'll get to that later. But you may try asking your bargaining team. They might be able to give you these numbers in short order, and then we'll also give you an email address that you can channel these specific questions to at the end.
If you go to pips.ca/groups, there's a tab in that window where you can access the group executive email addresses, and you should be able to email them directly that way. Andrea's also added better together at pips.ca in the email, because we can also help connect you with those folks as well. Any other questions about the calculations that Ryan has gone through? I'll give it just one moment. Again, you can either type your questions in the chat box, or you can select the raise your hand icon to ask a question over the phone. We are happy to take questions over the phone or in the chat box, whatever you prefer. I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, sorry, I spoke too soon. This is a comment from Eve, who says, Annexes A of the CA contain errors in the pay notes. The 2.816 and 5.082 are exact when you divide the A and B scales by the money scale.
I mean, this is very specific. I'd have to see what's being referenced, but we can talk about it offline, or we can, you know.
I think this says EH group is very different from standard full-time work week, is a question from Patty.
Well, I think this is a good segue into the next section, where, I mean, each retro payment you receive.
Sorry, she means SH. That makes more sense now. The SH group is very different from standard full-time work week.
Yeah. And then, okay, and again, it is a good segue into the next section, which is kind of, you know, this is a good estimate, a way to, you know, if you just want to ballpark what you're owed, you know, this is kind of within your reach for more complicated cases. And if you want to be precise, then it's better to use the kind of the more precise tools that are at your disposal. And so I guess if you did, you would just, I mean, the process for calculating retro is the same. You know, while, you know, the annual salary, you'd just be expanding. So if the annual salary doesn't really capture, you know, what you earn in a year, then you could, you know, put the annual salary and then put, you know, an estimated amount for, you know, what you get in overtime, and then apply that percentage, and that would give you that estimate. And then we'll move to the next section and get into how to get more precision. So yeah, so like I said, if you want to, you know, that's a rough estimate. If you want to be more exact, it's probably better to work with the tools that are available. So this is the Phoenix pay stub, and so what you'll see on there is amounts that are on your normal your normal biweekly pay stub. And then if you're getting, you know, retro amounts, then these new line items will show up as well. And so most of them, you know, they seem to have changed a little, but, you know, they're going to have the word retro in there. And if you see retro in there and an amount connected to this line item, then each of these lines will correspond to a detailed summary, and you will have access to that detailed summary. And so where do you find them? You go into your Phoenix account or your compensation web application and follow this pathway, and you will get, like I said, access to a detailed summary of every line item that shows up on your pay stub that has to do with retro. This is the CBA retro payment tab. And when you do, you'll see a page that looks, you know, approximately like this. This page will give you all the inputs that went into each retro payment. You can look at this information and see if it makes sense. If the inputs are all good, hopefully you'll be more confident that the payment is good. If the inputs are, alternatively, if you have identified that the inputs are incorrect or something is missing, at the very least, it's easier to flag the problem. And so if you're, you know, getting in touch with a compensation advisor or someone at the pay center to talk about this stuff, it's probably worth your while to look at this first, because this will probably be one of the first things that they direct you to. So, you know, going into a little bit more detail, you see that you know, that big box, and kind of all these are the factors that explain the retro payment. And then you go to the far right, and you see these total amount columns, and these are the amounts that show up on your pay stubs. And so, you know, you have those amounts, and then you have an explanation for what went into those amounts. And so, yeah, so when it's a more complicated case, then, you know, you can see them broken down in this way, and it should simplify them to a certain extent. And so, you know, looking at this information, it gives you, you know, some steps to follow. You can check, hey, is my classification correct? Do the dates make sense? Do the payable days cover the entire retro period? Is my salary correct? And, you know, other things to kind of flag, like if you know your salary changed during the period, you should be able to see a change in your salary during the corresponding to a different retro payment. So, going a little further into that information, how do I determine if the hourly rate is correct? So looking at that CBA retro payment page and zooming in on the hourly rate, a very important part. If it's not right, then something's wrong. But when you have that number, you should be able to use that to correspond to an annual salary in the collective agreement. So here again, we're using the PC2 as the example. And so from that number, you times it by 37.5 hours in the work week. And this is a standardized number in most collective agreements, 52.176 weeks per year, again, standardized in most collective agreements. And then you should be able to correspond exactly with a salary in the collective agreement. And so this is in the expired collective agreement because this is what you are being paid during the retro period. And so for this person, so you'd look and you can see, you find the salary and you can determine whether or not you are being paid at the appropriate rate. Next, how do I use the information provided to verify my retro payment? And so, zooming into kind of this area of the CBA retro payment page, you can see that the number on the pay stub is not a black box. All the information that went into that number is available to you. And so if you want to double check it, it's within your power. So step one would be to figure out your payable salary, and that is your hourly rate of pay, and it's not included, but again, standardized in the collective agreement, 7.5 a day is 7.5 hours times the number of payable days, and then that would give you the payable salary. And if the work weeks are less standardized, it should be reflected some interplay with these numbers. But that should where the payable salary total comes from shouldn't be a mystery. And then the next step would be to just take that payable salary and then, like we did in the last example, just apply that standardized percentage increase to it, and then you have an explanation for where that retro payment came from. So and now a little troubleshooting, kind of anticipating some questions. How do I know if something's missing? And so if something, I mean, the first flag, if something's not there, if something's not reflected in the page, then it's missing. So one thing to look at the dates and make sure that all the days of the retro period, day one of the new contract to the day your salary was changed, are covered in that document. You need to make sure that all applicable compensation is visible. So your base salary, any overtime, any applicable acting assignments, maternity parental allowance. If you may get a chunk of it, but know that hey, I cashed out some overtime, earned and cashed out some overtime during this period as well, but that doesn't show up. That you can should be expecting a little bit more. And then lastly, the employer is contractually obliged to notify people if they think there's going to be a delay. What I've been telling people is that when they ask me about timeline, I can't give them an exact timeline, but I can say if you haven't been notified, you should expect your salary to change and a retro payment within 180 days. Next issue, I looked at my salary and I looked at my salary record and discovered a new problem with my pay. And so if this is a new problem, it hasn't been flagged with Phoenix, you have to go through the Phoenix steps. And so you have to fill out a Phoenix feedback form. We have a team and many resources devoted to helping people through these issues. We kind of, as I alluded to, we had to kind of, in order to come to this deal, we had to kind of separate Phoenix issues from implementation issues, and this would be a Phoenix issue, and particularly, and make sure if it's urgent, make sure you let everybody know what the specifics of your situation are. And then, but be confident that it doesn't change the amount that you are owed at the end of the day. When the mistake is corrected, any retroactive amounts owed will be accounted for and paid. Next issue, I wasn't being paid properly during the retro period, and have already flagged the problem. So you've already gone through those Phoenix steps. And so again, within the 180 days, the employer is on the hook for retro based on your snapshot of the historical salary record. So if you're not being paid correctly, you know that you're still going to be owed some, but it's not going to come until after that's fixed. And then the next one, I think it's the last one. So I received retro payments. I looked at my CBA retro payment page, but I still have questions or concern. And this is, it's in terms of speed and efficiency. The first thing you should do is talk to the employer, talk to the, and because pay is one of their primary responsibilities. You understanding your pay is one of their primary responsibilities. You can hopefully use this information to target your questions better and not jump ahead in the process a little bit. But coming to us first would probably slow things down because they have access to the relevant information, and you have access to the relevant information that we don't have. So if you're waiting on somebody before you talk to the employer, it will just slow down the process. Not that we won't help you. But if you still have ongoing issues afterwards, contact a PIP steward or ERO. If you're still concerned after speaking with the employer, if you don't agree with the explanation you received, we're here legally and ethically required to look out for your best interests, and we would, provide advice coming from that standpoint. So that's about the end of everything that was in the presentation, but we have a lot of time left for questions, and we'll stay here as long as we need to.
So if you would like to ask a question over the phone, I'll just remind everyone that you can use the raise hand icon. It's located at the bottom of your screen next to the chat button. I will keep a speakers list, and when it's your turn, I'll call your name or telephone number, it looks like for some of you. You will then receive a message on your screen, a pop-up window asking you if you wish to have your line unmuted. Select the button unmute now, and you'll be able to ask your question over the phone. I see that there are some questions starting to fill up in the chat box, so I'm going to start to work my way through those. The first question comes to us from Michael. Michael's asking, is there any SLA for mistakes to be fixed?
What's an SLA?
Could you give us that acronym, Michael, maybe in the chat box? And we're going to move on to another question from Kai. Is asking, someone might have asked already, we get a copy of the slideshow if possible? Kai, I'll just let you know that the slide deck, as well as a recording of this presentation, will be uploaded to our website later this week. We'll be sending an email to everyone who registered for these sessions, letting them know when it's there. So you will get a copy of this shortly. Michael wanted to clarify that it's the service level agreement. So he's asking, is there a service level agreement for mistakes to be fixed?
So I'm still not 100% clear, but so if the mistake is based on your historical salary record, so they made a mistake based on, the approach, what the employer's on the hook for is basically you were paid a certain amount during the retro period, they owe you percentages applied to those amounts within 180 days. If they don't do that, then then they face additional penalties. If the delays are caused, if you receive a payment based on your historical salary record, but there are little things missing in your, that's been identified as being a Phoenix problem, you won't receive any additional penalties related to implementation, but it qualifies as a Phoenix problem, and there's a whole separate process for recuperating out-of-pocket expenses and damages related to Phoenix.
So the next question we get is from Molly. I assume this is in relation to retro pay, but Molly is asking, what are the tax implications? Are we paying more tax? Can we reduce that by changing previous year claims?
I'm not supposed to provide any sort of tax advice, and then part of that is a liability thing, and then also because each person's tax situation is different, we negotiate based on, I mean, I don't, we don't negotiate the tax laws, and so you'll have to talk to an accountant about, you know, figuring out how best to optimize your tax situation.
So we have a question from Gaz. Gaz is asking, what is included in the snapshot of your pay?
So it should be everything that's connected to your, any type of compensation that is connected to your annual salary, like so anything that's a percentage of your salary. So, you know, overtime is, you know, comes from, you know, hours worked, and so, you know, hours worked is determined by your annual salary. So that would show up in your historical salary record. Any applicable acting assignments, you know, some of them are applicable, some of them not. You know, so if it's an acting assignment within the same bargaining unit, that, you know, that would be basically any payment that you received that is connected formally to your annual salary leaves you eligible to receive retro pay on that amount.
So I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat box, but I will just remind folks that you can enter any questions that you have, and it can be about the content that we've just gone over or any aspect of the presentation that we've gone through today, either in the chat box, or you can use the raise your hand icon if you'd like to ask a question over the phone. Sometimes I find that's a little bit easier if you have a bit more of a complicated question, or just want to be able to go into a bit more detail. To do that, you click on the raise your hand icon that's located at the bottom of your screen. It's just next to the chat icon. If you can't see it, you can hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen and it'll appear. When you raise your hand, I'll unmute your line. You'll get a message on your computer asking you to confirm you're okay with having your line unmuted. You select unmute now, and you'll be able to ask a question over the phone. So again, if you have questions, you can either use the raise hand icon, or you can type your questions into the chat box. So we'll wait a few more minutes to see if a few more questions come in. We don't have any in the chat box right now. We're obviously happy to stay on the line and answer any questions that you have. But if you don't have any questions, we want to thank you for taking the time for participating in today's session. As we said, we will be emailing everyone with a link to a spot on our website where a recording of this presentation will go up along with a copy of the slide deck itself. So if you want to use this as a tool to calculate your retro pay, figure out what you're owed, make sure that you've received the accurate amount, we're here to help you with that. So thanks to everyone who tuned in today. If you have questions, please feel free to stay on the line. If you don't have any questions, thanks for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. I will just also let you know we've got the Do Better email up as well. If you want to get a hold of us, this is a really direct way to ask questions if you don't have time to stay on the line now. Thanks to everybody who joined us, and thanks to those who asked questions. As I said, we'll stay on the line for a little bit longer, but if we don't see any questions, we'll sign off shortly. So we do have one question from Eve. It says, from separate agencies other than TBS, where can you get the summaries or collective agreements?
So really, the collective agreements are supposed to be up online. They are not ready, so we're expecting them to come up any day now. There is some information on the group pages. If you want to, you know, they will post some information about the specifics of the tentative agreement, and there's a lot of information in there. They will also have the dates of the signing. And then additionally, because, you know, we've recognized that it's been too long without the collective agreements being posted, and the collective agreements have these specific percentages that are applied for for each period. Within the next few days, we'll post kind of a cheat sheet that shows by classification and level what the economic increases are, the cumulative economic increases are for the different periods.
So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box, so I think we're going to sign off for now. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great afternoon or rest of your day, and we will talk shortly. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.